I did my PhD in quantum engineering, graduated last year, and during my whole PhD, I've been working from time to time with different startups, with different institutions in UK. And today I wanted to share that story with you because I wasn't sure who my audience would be today and what backgrounds you come from and what kind of work you do and how quantum fits into your world. So I decided to basically give a narrative of what's been going on and then maybe in that way ignite some conversation. So this is a story of moving basically from one periphery to another, from a country where quantum is misunderstood to global institutions where it felt quite unreachable. And along the way, I discovered something that communication in quantum basically isn't an afterthought. It's a bridge between disciplines, cultures, and between people in power. And in this photo, I just always like to share it whenever I give presentation because this is a part of my research group back in Bristol where I did my PhD. My supervisor, postdoc, and two friends from PhD, and this photo actually happened during the COVID year. Uh, we went to give a couple of talks in Japan, and that was actually my first time when I had like very different cultural experience communicating science, and hence the photo there. So I come from Serbia. I was born there. I did my undergrad there, and the country where I come from has a long tradition of producing brilliant scientists, many of whom go abroad because of limited funding and infrastructure at home. And those people truly inspired me in the sense of science they did. Their extraordinary careers made everything seem possible, despite the humble origins they came from. And out of all the possible topics and disciplines, I became interested in quantum physics during high school, not because of specific curriculum, but because I was basically drawn to the philosophy of it, how quantum idea seems to touch on something deeper. This blend of physics and philosophy and the questions about reality, uncertainty, information completely pulled me in. But when I looked around, I saw very, very little serious discourse. Most of it was, like some quasi stories about can quantum do medicine? Will, like the ray of light, the red color, heal my headaches and stuff like that. So it couldn't be understood seriously. So then I decided to apply for various UK universities, got accepted to most of them, but couldn't afford the tuition as an overseas student. So I stayed in Belgrade. And I studied electrical engineering there. It was a module for physical electronics, where I focused on photonics. And we were a very, very small community under the radar, but we were very passionate about the science we were doing. So, working with my classmates on projects, I began to see the power of community and how essential it is to be able to freely communicate scientific ideas. And that's also when I helped found the Optica, or it used to be Optical Science, Society of America student chapter in Belgrade. And there we organize different fairs and different outreach activities to help people understand what photonics is and why it matters. And it was my first real glimpse of science, not as an individual pursuit, but as something collective and something that needs communication to survive. So one of the most decisive moments, I think, in my education, career, and development as a scientist happened one evening during my undergrad in Belgrade. I attended a public lecture by Professor Vlatko Vedrel. He's Serbian born, but UK naturalized and based physicist, known not just for his scientific achievements, but the way he speaks about quantum science. And he had a presence, literally almost like a rock star. The way he spoke and the analogies he used and the holistic lens he brought to physics were unlike anything I had seen. And at that time, Vlatko was exploring bio-inspired quantum technologies and how quantum principles might help us better understand the living world. And it was quantum not just as computation, but as the language itself. But he also spoke about his book, Decoding Reality. But what stayed the most with me during that evening was something completely different, a project called Quantum Music. Um, it was collaboration between scientists and composers to turn quantum concepts like superposition, entanglement, and measurement into sound. And that project was funded by EU at the time. And it basically aimed to make quantum engaging and accessible to public, especially at that time. It was, I think, 2016 or 2017. And what struck me the most wasn't engineering or science behind it, but it was the reaction in the room they made. People weren't intimidated at all. They were curious. They were really leaning in and asking questions. And in that moment, quantum felt like something that could enter other fields and spheres, not just labs and research papers, but in this very case, the culture too. So through his openness, warmth, and clarity, Vlatko encouraged me to ask questions, even naive ones that I would normally be ashamed to ask at my university lecture. So later, through a mentor-mentee relationship that grew out of that evening, he gave me confidence to apply for a PhD in quantum, even though my background was in electrical engineering, not pure physics. And that kind of transition was rare where I come from, but this whole conversation made it feel possible. So after that round of applications and preparation for everything, I got accepted to several PhD programs, but ultimately chose the one in Bristol because it focused on quantum photonics, the field I already very much loved. So before I started, I had a chance to spend nearly 6 months at the Institute for Quantum Computing in Waterloo, Canada. In 2018, IQC was still one of the pioneering centers in the world. And not just in research, but in shaping a whole ecosystem around quantum. And for a student from Serbia, it felt like a dream. I was being paid to work in one of the top labs in the field, surrounded by startups, global researchers, and the Perimeter Institute was literally just down the road. But almost immediately, I felt like I was missing something fundamental. The lab work was exciting, but the language of the field was really impenetrable. The scientific jargon was everywhere, and it was very layered, dense, and unpacked. There was an unspoken assumption that if you couldn't follow the conversation, you really didn't belong in the room, or at least that's how it felt to me at the time. And it led to a lot of self-doubt and second guessing. We had many, many brilliant postdocs giving talks, but the level of abstraction made me feel like I hadn't done my homework really, even though I was studying quantum. So I felt imposter syndrome for the first time in my life. And even with all the energy, the startups, the accelerator programs, the way people talked about quantum made it feel really like a private language. And that's when I realized something important, that the scientific excellence and communication don't always go hand in hand. In fact, the deeper the expertise, the more disconnected the language often became, not just from the public, but even from scientists in adjacent fields. And that was my first real understanding that quantum's not just difficult, it's also very, very culturally exclusive. And in my mind, that really needed to change. And after my time in IQC Canada, I began my PhD at University of Bristol, joining the first ever cohort of Quantum Engineering Center for Doctoral Training. And the change came very quickly, much quicker than I expected. It was a completely different ecosystem, one that didn't just permit communication, but to my surprise, it was built in both the curriculum and the broader culture of cath labs. And alongside our technical training, we had formal modules on interdisciplinary collaboration, public engagement, and even policy awareness. And our cohort taught quantum concepts to, if I remember correctly, I think those are pupils from 12 to 16 years old, and that was all in local schools. And we also engaged in with the public in creative and very unexpected ways. One of our collaborations was with local Kilter Theatre, where we co-developed an immersive performance exploring ethical questions in quantum tech. Separately, we also contribute to Light Keys, a graphic novel created by Cat Labs and local artist Milica Brokic. And that graphic novel was designed to explain quantum communication concepts through visual storytelling. And indeed, this slide, you can see like one of the creations that the artist made. You can see like abstraction of waveguide in the background and photons moving around. And those things were for us not just side projects. They were funded, integrated, and very much valued. It was part of everyone's work. And the students, we were evaluated not just on our technical abilities, but on our ability to communicate, translate, and also reflect. And for the first time, I saw what it looks like when a scientific ecosystem rewards communication, not just as an afterthought, but as very much needed infrastructure. So all of these creative projects, the theater, the graphical novel, the school workshops, made me start asking, why does this actually work? And part of the answer lies in the concept from the sociology of science called boundary objects. These are tools or representations that different people from different fields or backgrounds can use to collaborate without needing to fully agree on terminology or frameworks. So in quantum, where the science is highly abstract and the language often exclusive, the art creates a way in. So a metaphor, a mural, or a comic book doesn't water down the science. It simply allows people to feel something before they understand it precisely and are free to ask more questions. And surprisingly, these projects didn't just help us reach the public or policymakers. They helped us, the scientists, communicate with each other and lower the boundaries between us. And especially because not everyone in our cohort was expert on everything. We have people coming from computer science, maths, physics, but these creative and non-hierarchical environments made it easier to ask questions, exchange ideas, and basically drop the performance of knowing. And especially for us, for those of us just starting out, that kind of openness was transformative, and it showed us that communication isn't just a tool for outreach, it's a tool for the community, the science community itself. And what I experienced in Bristol CDT wasn't just an isolated experiment. It was part of a broader national shift as well. Starting around 2018, the UK began to treat science communications as infrastructure, not just as a PR or outreach. The UK National Quantum Technologies Programme began actively investing in public engagement as part of its mission. And some of the efforts included Quantum City, which is a nationwide initiative coordinated by the 4 quantum hubs, focused on exhibits, explainers, and direct engagement with the public, students, and policymakers that at the time reached over 25,000 people. Then Quantum Ambassador Scheme, led by the NQCC, or National Quantum Computing Center, and the Institute of Physics, which trained teachers and created a network of schools acting as quantum champions. And there, over 500 schools have been involved since 2021. Then school engagement programs developed workshops for UK secondary schools, trained teachers, and embedded quantum international STEM curriculum. Then there are like creative projects like Quantum Shorts and Quantum on the Clock, which are short story and photo competitions that encouraged artistic response to quantum ideas, and that was supported by the UK and Singapore as well. And the Quantum Technology Showcase, which is coordinated by Innovate UK, it's a big national yearly showcase that includes public demos, talks, and visible science communication as a big part of a national roadmap. And all of this was supported with dedicated funding streams from the government, with a clear messaging. Communication isn't optional anymore; it's strategic. And investing in it early, the UK positioned itself not just as a quantum leader, but as a communicator too. And up until that point in my schooling career or so, I was encouraged to talk about science, but mostly within scientific spaces. We gave talks, wrote papers, presented our work to other scientists. And this was really rewarding, but over time, it started to feel a bit incomplete. I began to sense that I was living in a loop, doing science for the sake of science without knowing who it would ultimately serve. And when the pandemics hit, I returned to Serbia and found myself suddenly isolated with my research and with lots of thoughts that were not communicated. So that pause gave me a space to ask different questions. Some of them were, what's the point of all this if it doesn't reach anyone? Who is it helping? And at those moments of isolation, I started searching online for people working in quantum but outside academia. This is when I discovered Biljana Rajević, a Serbian-Australian strategist working in the emerging space of quantum industry. In quantum industry at that time was still in its infancy, and the rules were still forming, and the rules were quite undefined. And Biljana had no formal quantum training. She came from consulting, from big tech, and from innovation strategy. And yet she was helping startups shape how they speak to investors, how they align with markets, and how internal teams communicate across disciplines. And it took me some time to understand the kind of work she was doing, and even longer to believe I could do some of it too. So she helped me realize that we don't all have to be physicists to bring value to the field of quantum, and that scientists don't have to stay in the lab to make impact. She also introduced Quantum Women, a global initiative supporting women across quantum ecosystem, where I now serve as one of their program leads. And one of their programs, Under the Hood, shares real day-to-day perspective from women in that field, how their roles work out, what they do in their day-to-day job. And that kind of transparency was transformative. It showed me that quantum industry doesn't have to be rigid or exclusive, and that it can be shaped, expanded, and made more inclusive from the very beginning through asking right questions and encouraging conversations between various stakeholders. And around the same time, I began speaking with Zeki Seskir, who some of you may know from this very event when he was speaking live. Through him, I discovered a whole new dimension of quantum work, one focused on responsible innovation, ethics, governance, and policy. Until then, I did not realize that entire communities exist to make sure emerging technologies like quantum are ethically aligned, socially informed, and designed with transparency and public good in mind. And these conversations opened my eyes to the fact that good science is not enough. If we don't build structures to guide its use and communicate its meaning, we risk doing much, much more harm than good. And inspired by these ideas and conversations, back in Serbia, I co-founded Quantum Serbia, which is a grassroots initiative aimed at making quantum more visible, accessible, and grounded in our local context. And we didn't have any institutional support or national funding there, but we had people who were very enthusiastic, and we had purpose. So we ran events, programs, talks, and all of those were built on belief that communication can create community even from scratch. And around that time, I also had a chance to support the CDT grant renewal in Bristol. That was the renewal of the grant of the program that basically educated me. And my role was to help communicate the value of our program to various stakeholders across academia and industry, and to show that our training was contributing to the broader ecosystem in order for it to be supported further. And that effort paid off. We secured 24 million pounds in renewed funding, and that was largest such CDT grant in the UK so far. And it was a moment of affirmation that said that communication is not peripheral, it's central to also trust in investment and impact itself. So after I finished my PhD, I joined Classic, a quantum software startup focused on algorithm design. It was a completely different environment. It was very fast-paced, interdisciplinary, and nothing like academia. The platform itself was impressive, a compiler that lets users synthesize quantum circuits from high-level functional models. But I quickly learned that having great technology isn't enough again. If we couldn't clearly articulate its value to vastly different audiences, developers, enterprise buyers, researchers, educators, it risked being misunderstood, overlooked, and in the end, dismissed. So in startups, communication isn't about just public outreach, it's about survival. So it's the difference between a partner saying interesting and let's set up a meeting. And I found myself constantly shifting context, translating not just between domains, but between the expectations, from quantum scientists to sales teams, from researchers to UX designers, and then from technical features to strategic use cases. And ironically, the same communication gap I felt as a student between quantum insiders and everyone else now existed within the company too. And that's when it hit me again. In early stage quantum, communication is not just a skill, it's connective tissue that holds everything together. So how do you actually do it? How do you communicate something as abstract, technical as quantum, especially when you're working across disciplines or across different expectations? And here are the few strategies I've used, some of them consciously, some I recognized in hindsight. One of those is stakeholder mapping. Basically, start by understanding who you're talking to. Are they technical or strategic? Do they care about speed, scale, compliance, IP? And then tailor your message accordingly. Then there is functional framing. Don't start with qubits or gate sets. Start with what the technology enables and what does it let them do that they couldn't do before having this technology. Then stories over specs. Narratives help people place new ideas into familiar context. We shifted from here's our tech stack to here's how someone like you might use this. Then translation within teams. Sometimes the communication challenge is internal. I often helped explain the quantum road mapping to marketing or converted UX feedback into engineering terms. And above all, start with curiosity. Instead of correcting people, ask them, what do you already know about quantum? What's confusing? What are you trying to solve? And that opens the door. The goal isn't simplification for its own sake, but it's creating new entry points and building trust from there. And of course, for every good strategy, there are also common traps, and I've fallen into most of them at some point. So these are the patterns I try to avoid, whether I'm talking to colleagues or investors or students in the end. First of all is explaining too early. So jumping into technical detail before you understand what the other person actually cares about. Then one of the pitfalls is assuming shared language, using words like superposition or scalability as if they mean the same thing to everyone. They rarely do. Hiding behind complexity. Sometimes we overcomplicate things to protect ourselves and to sound credible and sometimes even avoid criticism. But complexity isn't always clarity. Underestimating emotion. We treat quantum like a cold hard science, but people make decisions based on emotion, intuition, and identity. And that goes especially in academia, outside academia. And the last one would be thinking communication comes later, because in reality, it's part of the build process, not the stage that comes after the product is finished. So those things listed here aren't just soft skills, they're structural decisions in the end, and it's about who feels welcome in the conversation and who feels excluded. So where are we now? Quantum is no longer a research niche. It's a growing industry, a policy priority, and also a global investment space. And we've seen great communication efforts in the UK, in Australia. Those are some examples I gave today. Grassroots communities like Quantum Women or Quantum Serbia or Quantum World, where the key is. But we still have a long way to go. So too often communication is treated as something extra, a nice to have, and we need to treat it as something essential, a skill, a responsibility, and a shared infrastructure. So what I've learned is that communication isn't just about public engagement or outreach, it's about clarity across the teams, collaboration across disciplines, and trust across the systems. So whether you're in academia, industry, or policy, quantum needs people who can build bridges. And I'm assuming if you're here today listening, you're probably one of those people. So a final thought for today. The limit of my language is the limit of my world. And in quantum, the limits of our language aren't just philosophical. They're technical, strategic, and social. We build what we can describe and we share what we can name. So if we want quantum to be truly transformative, not just profitable, but meaningful, then communication has to evolve with the science. So if you ever thought communication was the soft skill, try building something truly new without it. So quantum needs better hardware, better software, better theory, but just as urgently, it needs better conversations. So thank you for your attention today, and let's talk.